Hello and welcome. I'm Emily Buchanan. I'm a BBC journalist with a background in both world affairs and religion, and I present the Radio 4 programme Sunday on Religion and Ethics. And I'm your chair for this webinar. Well, it's lovely to see so many of you here on International Women's Day, and I hope we can leave you feeling empowered to take action for the many, many women and girls who suffer terrible persecution because of their religious faith. Aid to the Church in Need, ACN, and Open Doors have collaborated for this event because both organisations, independently of each other, have been closely monitoring and highlighting this woefully underreported problem, the persecution of women and girls from religious minority communities. This persecution can include Uyghur Muslim women coerced into having abortions against their will, Hindu and Christian girls, often underaged, kidnapped, raped, forced to convert and marry their abductors. Or Christian women in Nigeria, abducted by Boko Haram warlords to become their wives. Well, today we'll be hearing first-hand accounts of the abuse suffered by religious minority women, as well as hearing the thoughts of Fiona Bruce MP, the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. But first, we'll begin with some videos from Aid to the Church in Need and Open Doors about some of the work they've been doing in this area, with witness testimonies too. We'll begin now with Open Doors and David Landrum.
Hello, welcome. I'm David Landrum. I'm the Director of Advocacy at Open Doors UK in Ireland, and 6 weeks ago Open Doors launched our World Watch List report, which looks at the top 50 countries where it's most difficult and hazardous and dangerous to be a Christian around the world. It was notable that we dedicated an entire section of that report to the persecution of women and girls because it is a global phenomenon with huge implications for us all. Today, on International Women's Day, we're launching another report that looks at gender-specific religious persecution and how the persecution of men and women is different, and specifically how the persecution of women is hidden, violent, and complex. Hidden in the sense that the persecution is often camouflaged within society through things like forced marriage, violent through sexual assaults, and through the use of shame, the strategic use of shame to completely destabilize an entire community. And complex because often women in many of the communities in our top 50 and elsewhere are seen as second-class citizens. They just do not have the rights and the equality that they should have. So we're now going to see a video from Nigeria, which illustrates the persecution of Christian women and girls and how they need our support and how they need our voice so that they are not forgotten.
Sai abin da ya zo ya faru da yamma ranar Juma'a sai Boko Haram suka shigo garinmu suna ta dinga harbe kawai sai mu kuma muka gudu haka suka kama mu. Cewa gashi ana dukan mu, gashi ba abinci, gashi kuma an ce mu koma musulmai. A lokacin da na zama musulma ba wai na so din daɗi ba, dun wahala, dun kar su kashe ni ne, shi yasa na yi musunta Yesu. Yanzu a haka da muka zama da su suka aurar da ni, na yi ciki na haifa wani yaro ana ce mishi Sumaila. Na gudu na zo gida, gaskiya mama na ta yi farin ciki cewa na dawo, amma babana shi bai yi farin ciki ba. Lokacin da na zo babana ya ki ni don abin da ya faru da ni, don an gaya mishi ne cewa ni ne na so Boko Haram sun ɗauke ni sun tafi da ni.
Some people come here and you see their face. From their face, you know that they are traumatized. You know that they are hurt. They are hurting inside. Now, after working with them for 5 days, 1 week, you see their faces change. There's a glow in their faces, and you know that God has touched them through trauma healing.
An karantar mana akan karfafawa kuma da kuma yafewa. Da na zo gida kuma na yafewa mutane ango kuma na yafewa babana duk abin da yana faɗa mini. Idan na kalli yara nan guda biyu na ran wani zai sa ni tunani yanzu ina faɗa wayannan mutane sun cuce ni. Da a ce ba su cuce ni ba da ba zan haifa yara nan ba amma tun da Allah ne ya bani zan rike su.
So many things are happening that people don't really believe that it's going on. Like many women being kidnapped and being raped, some of them being killed. It's something that it's clear, but in the outside world, it's hidden and people don't really realize that this is happening in Nigeria.
Well, that was a really powerful story. Thank you, David. And now over to John Pontifax from Aid to the Church in Need.
Thank you, Emily. At Aid to the Church in Need, ACN, the Catholic charity for persecuted and other suffering Christians, were in frequent contact with the victims of kidnapping, forced conversion, and forced marriage, so often itself a cover for gross sexual crimes. Acting on behalf of the charity, I have spoken directly with those who have suffered these terrible crimes, including Pakistan's Mara Shahbaz, abducted aged just 14, and Farah Shaheen, who was taken aged just 12. So often, girls and women of this kind feel abandoned by the West. They feel the West does not recognize the religious motivation behind their abductors' actions. Yes, they are targeted for their sex, but it is their situation as faith minorities that makes them so vulnerable to attack. Indeed, their oppressors so often justify acts of coercion and worse by saying it's worth it if they win a convert. This is why we at Aid to the Church in Need have produced a special report called Hear Her Cries: The Kidnapping, Forced Conversion, and Sexual Victimization of Christian Women and Girls. Please do order a free copy, and in the chat you'll see how you can do this. Well, a few months ago I spoke to Pastor Ghazala. Well, she's looking after a number of Christian girls forced into hiding, among them Neha Parvez. Aged just 13 in Pakistan, Neha was abducted, forcibly married, and forcibly converted. In the video that you're about to see, Neha bravely describes the horrific abuse she suffered. We cannot let Neha become yet another forgotten woman. Here's her story.
Her name is Neha Parvez. One evening, Neha, aged 13, and her family received a visit from her aunt named Sundas. Her aunt asked permission from her mother to take Neha with her to visit her sick son in the hospital, which was actually a lie. She never wanted to take Neha to the hospital. Instead, she was conspiring with her brother, 30 years older than Neha, to get Neha married to him. Sundas and Imran both are Muslims. When Neha's mother granted leave to go with the Aunt Sundas to visit the sick son, when she was going, the aunt took Neha's younger brother Haris also with them. Haris is only 2 years old. She never took her to the hospital. Instead, she was taken to a flat. So I asked Neha what happened when she reached to the flat. When they reached to the flat instead of hospital, she was told that you are getting married to Imran. Remember, Imran is 30 years older than Neha. When she refused that I'm a small girl, I'm a young girl, I don't want to get married. They snatched her brother from her, they beat her, and then they locked her in a room. Then Imran came inside the room and he sexually assaulted her, raped her many times, and then left her locked in the room, and he went outside. So she stayed there overnight, and next morning they took her to an unknown place along with her brother. And there they told her, if you try to talk to anybody or you try to tell your story to anybody, we will kill your brother. So there they gave her some papers to put her signature on those papers. When she wrote her name, Neha Pervez, she was told, no, you are not Neha, you are now Fatma. You are now married, you are a Muslim now, and your age is also 18 years, you are 18 years old. And then they brought her back home. She was locked in the room again, but her brother was sent home back to the mother. And she was kept locked inside the room. She was kept locked in a room. Imran was repeatedly assaulting her, raping her every day, and Imran had a daughter same age as of Neha. She was coming, bringing meals to her 3 times a day, and Mehak saw Neha crying. Mehak felt the pain of Neha, and one day she helped her to escape from there.
Well, what a horrific account. Both of those accounts really, really moving. And as our last one was from Pakistan, I'd like to bring in our first contributor, Hina Malouh. Hina is a Christian Pakistani who suffered persecution and abuse firsthand and then left for the UK. Hina, welcome. Could you just briefly, perhaps for us, summarize your experience as a Christian woman in Pakistan?
Thank you, Emily. So as a Christian growing up in Pakistan, I've experienced a lot of hatred and discrimination. And, you know, as Christians, we live in so much fear that our parents take extra measures to protect us. As a young girl, it meant that my mum didn't allow visits or friends' houses. And rightly so, I think, because as Christians and as girls, we are very vulnerable and an easy prey. I was once followed from my university campus to the bus stop by 2 of my Muslim class fellows who had then found out that I was a Christian girl. And I started wearing even bigger shawls and hid myself even better to blend in. And, you know, these instances are very common. They happen to so many people around us. But I really started understanding...
Were you shocked? Were you shocked, Hina, that even at university and as a student and a high-achieving student, you were suffering such discrimination?
Absolutely. You know, you would expect much better from education institutions. And I'd share one example where I was the only Christian girl at my college, and I was made to attend a prayer sermon in Ramadan season, and the university hall, the college hall was packed with female staff and students, and I was the only Christian. And the prayer started in Arabic and in Urdu, and it came to the intercessory prayers, and it said, may Allah destroy all the Christians. And everybody said, Amen. It continued, may Allah devastate the West. And everybody again said, Amen. I was absolutely shocked at the response of my friends sitting right next to me. And that
I'm sure
was
you
one
must
of the prestigious colleges.
You must have been devastated. And of course, it's very hard to say anything in that context, isn't it? To speak out.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's why the matters of religious persecution are not reported well, because Christians are so much afraid to speak up. You know, there is so much of that could happen to you if you were to speak up, as just in one of the videos as well we heard.
Well, thank you, Hina, for now. I think I'd like to hear now from our other panelist, Rahima Mahut. Rahima is a Muslim Uyghur, a singer, a translator, and a prominent human rights activist who's now left Xinjiang. She's worked closely with Uyghur women that have survived terrible sexual violence and torture in China's concentration camps. Rahima, welcome. Could you just perhaps pull together for us what you've learnt from the women you've worked with in the concentration camps?
Thank you very much. The women that I have translated for are incredibly brave, and they have shared deeply intimate aspects of their lives to secure justice for Uyghur people. By talking to them and listening to their stories, I have learned a lot about the horrors that take place within the walls of concentration camps and in my homeland, and also more widely. I have learned that sexual violence and torture are commonplace in the so-called re-education centers, and that women in the region are subjected to invasive surveillance on the street and in their own homes. They subject to forced sterilization, forced abortion, forced indoctrination, and forced labor. Also being forced to separated from their children. But I have also learned, by having this one-to-one conversation from survivors, that the trauma that they have carried as a result of their experiences, and they previously healthy women and now bear deep physical and psychological wounds.
Yes, I'm sure. And the persecution of the Uyghurs by the Chinese authorities has been described as a genocide by our parliament. Do you agree with that kind of language?
Yes, I, along with many in my community, was overwhelmed by the solidarity MPs showed us when they voted unanimously to declare the treatment of Uyghurs a genocide. This was a moment of a recognition for the Uyghurs we know well that our community are facing genocide. And in December last year, a People's Tribunal chaired by Sir Geoffrey Nice QC concluded, after sifting through thousands of pages of evidence and hearing dozens of first-hand accounts, that the Chinese government is committing genocide against my people and other Turkic groups. They concluded that the forced sterilizations and abortions carried out on a mass scale are designed to destroy a significant part of our community and therefore amount to genocide. So as MPs, NGOs, and now a panel of legal experts and citizens have determined what is taking place is genocide, and the UK government has a legal and a moral responsibility to prevent what is happening.
Well, for the moment, thank you, Rahima. And in fact, that brings us very nicely now to Fiona Bruce MP, who is the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief. Fiona, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Many people might argue that instances of sexual violence and forced marriage are things that happen to millions of women, whether or not they have any faith, and that they're probably targeted just because they're women. What would you say to that? How key is the role of religion in all of this?
Well, good morning, Emily. And can I first of all commend Open Doors and Aid to the Church in Need for highlighting this issue, which affects so many millions of women across the world. And yes, it is true to say that violence against women and girls is a global crisis, in the sense that one in three women will experience physical or sexual violence in their lives. But there's no doubt at all that evidence is showing that women from religious minorities can be more vulnerable, and there are several reasons for this. One of them is, if you are a member of a religious minority in a society, perhaps because you dress differently, you can be viewed as the other and targeted, perhaps as someone different or alien. And if, for example, you are also poor, as many women are, you can suffer a particular sense of powerlessness. You're a woman, you're a member of a religious minority, and you're poor. And that can often mean that you can get very little support from society as a whole. For example, if you go to the police and you make a complaint about something that has happened. But there are other reasons. For example, in cases of war, the bodies of women of religious minorities can often be actually used as a battleground, as rape can be used as a weapon of war to attack and punish the opponents in a political struggle. So women can be vulnerable victims in such situations. And then even if there isn't a conflict situation, often women can be sexually abused for mistaken reasons of ideology. We've heard about how women can be taken, abducted, forcibly so-called married and converted. And then finally, one last thing, and I thought Ruth's story was very moving. Women of religious minorities can face a particular stigma when they are abused, and then having been subjected to sexual violence, they're seen as bringing shame on their own community, so they're targeted by their own community, often not accepted by them. And that's why it's so important that, for example, we have to work with whole communities, with religious leaders, to challenge the acceptability of such violence and bring about change.
Yes, as you say, it's a very, very complex issue, isn't it? And I know you're very involved in this, and that I know you said that when you read the ACN report, Hear Her Cries, you did actually cry yourself. Can you just spell out very, very briefly, how have you tried to act to try and to prevent or even stop some of these very, very deeply ingrained kind of abuses?
Well, you're absolutely right to ask that, because we can have a sense of helplessness, especially when we're watching or hearing about this at some distance away. But there are lots of things people can do and parliamentarians can do. If you're an individual watching this, please do contact a Parliament and ask them to become a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Freedom of Religion or Belief. This is a group of members of Parliament who speak out in our Parliament about such situations. And if you're a parliamentarian, then we have to speak out, and we have to recognise that religious identity is a marker of vulnerability. And there are lots of ways that we can ask for change. For example, we can ensure there's wider help through humanitarian aid for such women, so that their vulnerability is recognised as a reason to supply aid to them. We can call for more extensive training in specialised trauma counselling. I thought Tirham's comments were very well informed, and it was interesting to show how that specialised trauma counselling, even of a few days, can make such a difference to a life that's been so hurt. But we also need, and this is where parliamentarians can come in, we need to call out in our own parliament where other countries, because people do listen to what is said in the UK Parliament from across the world, we need to call out where other countries are turning a blind eye to this, where authorities are not taking action, where they might even be condoning the situation, or where the legal systems need to be changed in such countries so that abused women can take their cases not just to the police and see them investigated, but through the court system, so that perpetrators can be held to account, and we can stop this happening in future.
Okay, thank you very much, Fiona. Well, actually, this is a very good moment, I think, to bring in our other two panelists, Hina and Rahima, who, of course, are on the front line of this terrible violence. Hina, first of all, what do you think about these kind of actions that Fiona's talking about? I mean, is this the right approach to, finance trauma counselling, to try and pressurise governments? I mean, what would you suggest is the best way forward?
Absolutely so. I mean, it is good that, these things can actually happen, because I think there's a lot of talk that's been already done. So something that's practical and active is really needed now. And on the ground support certainly is very valuable. But at the same time, I would also want to emphasize that, there are some cases with forced conversions and abductions that, girls are in hiding and their whole families are in hiding, and there is no safe ground for them in their country. To be considerate about, providing refuge abroad when it comes to considering the asylum cases and providing refuge in the UK, for instance. Many times, these crimes are not even reported or profiled better, but to know that there's a lot more going on the ground.
Yes, and what about you, Rahima? Do you think more should be done? I mean, you're up against a very, very deep attitude, aren't you, and a political motivation behind so many of these attacks.
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank Fiona Bruce MP for her work. One of the MPs that spoke out so passionately against, what is happening to my community, to your people. And all those work that she mentioned, of course, it is extremely important. But we have very small minority people only managed to escape. So far, I know like about 9 camp survivors that I know of. But majority people, all my community, including my siblings, my entire family are living in China and facing this genocide. And so far, the British government have not fulfilled their responsibility to act, and time and time again failed to act to prevent it. And so their response has been very limited to just a few sanctions. 4 officials so far, low-level officials, were sanctioned. But we believe we deserve so much more. And the government, in our opinion, must take much stronger action against Chinese government. Carry out at least assessment on serious risk of genocide taking place, and then act accordingly. So this is really kind of urgent kind of one of the campaign that I am leading, and really pleading for government to recognize it and act accordingly. Otherwise, the Uyghurs will be wiped out from our own homeland, at least the identity, the language, the religion as people. So this is what I would like to express about what is happening and how the government really not acting more to protect my community.
So, Fiona, I hear the division bell going there. But Fiona, before you have to rush off, could you please respond to that? I mean, I think probably, whether it's Pakistan, whether it's China, it's about muscle, isn't it? And real concerted action. Yes. What do you say to Rahima there?
It is, absolutely. And I know that the UK government is continuously looking at strengthening our sanctions process and our action in that respect. And I think another thing that we need to do is to actually work, as we have been doing recently, with other countries across the international community, because our collective voices as countries together can be much louder and stronger than one country alone. And so, absolutely right, I think there is more that can be done, but I can also confirm that the UK government is continuously looking at how we can do more to support some of the most vulnerable people in societies across the world, women who are threatened and jeopardised because of their religious faith. And indeed, just to close, it is something that I work on with the alliance of countries, 35 countries in the alliance representing countries committed to freedom of religion or belief. And we will continue to work to ensure that we do all we can to jointly call out these abuses, as I am doing with the UK government through our Truro review, which is a review that has committed through the government's manifesto commitment to ensuring that our Foreign Office officials and other government officials really tackle this issue. So let me reassure those who are listening today that both here in the UK and internationally, this issue is increasingly on the agenda, and more people are looking to see what they can do to make a real difference for these women who are suffering so much.
I mean, I suppose one of the big issues, and I know it applies very much to Pakistan. There are laws there that are supposed to protect the rights of these women. These laws are not being implemented. So Pakistan has signed up to international agreements, but this is just simply not being seen on the ground. I mean, can the British government do anything to sort of try and make sure that Pakistan actually respects its own laws?
Absolutely, and this is something which I myself have worked on. It is vital that where there are such laws, that, as I say, locally, that the police take action and pursue the perpetrators, and then that through the court systems, the people who are perpetrating these terrible crimes are actually brought to public account. Because it's only if we do that, only if we see these perpetrators punished, that there is a likelihood that others will not commit the same actions in the future. And there's my bell again. So I apologise for that noise.
Well, I don't know whether you have to rush off or not, or whether you're able to stay for a few more minutes.
I should be rushing off now, yes. But,
you should be rushing off. All right. Well, maybe we'll let you go. But perhaps as we've got a few more minutes on this, we can keep Hina and Rahima here to lengthen the discussion. But thank you very much, Fiona, for joining us. Thank you.
It's my pleasure, and thank you to everyone on the call. And once again, can I just commend Aid to the Church in Need and Open Doors. And if anyone is watching, do please access the reports that they have referred to. They are indeed moving. And as I say, as the Prime Minister's envoy for freedom of religion or belief, a lot of reports passed my desk. But I have never wept as I wept reading Hear Her Cries about these vulnerable women as a woman myself. Thank you for all you're doing on this issue, and be assured I will continue to work with you and alongside you and for these vulnerable women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you for joining us, Fiona Bruce there. Just having to rush off for a vote. But as we've got a few more minutes, Hina, I just wanted to ask you how you feel about the situation in Pakistan, where the prejudice, as you've described, is so deep and ingrained. I mean, the laws barely seem to scratch the problem. Are we talking then about education? How do you encourage Pakistan to become a society where diversity, where minority religions are respected? What's your suggestion?
You see, I would have wanted to say that education was a solution, but most of my experiences of discrimination and hatred are coming from the education institution. So it's very complex situation. It's so deep, as you say, in the culture. What needs to be done, I think, is a change of mindset within that. That diversity is accepted, that people of religious minorities in particular are given the respect, because it's very sad that how the treatment of the other is inferior, and we are treated as second-class citizens almost, with no respect and nobody to turn to in a way, and a lot of fear. Alongside education, I would say, as Fiona was referring to, having the perpetrators put to account, to set good examples of the enforcement of law, so that the mass majority can see that it's not easy to take matters in their own hands. They can't just have mob killings and persecution of all sorts, and abductions going on. So I think it is a very complex matter, but perhaps a real change from within, with education, with openness to understanding the matter of religious persecution that's going on around them as well. I think many Pakistani Muslim majority doesn't even know that how severe and how brutal persecution is on the ground.
And I suppose the fact that when a Christian woman is married off or coerced into marriage, that becomes a kind of tick in the box for another conversion. That it's this idea that the greater good justifies, or the greater so-called good justifies any action or any violence.
You see, there is this concept that some hold that impregnating Christian women and having them give birth to non-Christian children is also a way of purification of the land. You see, that's how it's thought of. So with that mentality, you can't work towards equality and respect of minorities.
No, absolutely, it's very difficult. And Rahima, is there any similarity here for the problem, the sort of cultural problem between the Chinese and the Uyghur people? That there's a sort of visceral desire to just get rid of these people that are not sort of pure in some way.
Well, yes. I mean, all this evil, any kind of evil is embedded because of this kind of rhetoric or the belief. For example, in my country, there's Chinese government's branding of the Uyghurs as terrorists, especially after 9/11. That propaganda throughout China, using very small, like peaceful protest, and then after that was developed into violence after, deploying military, killing the peaceful protesters. And that kind of propaganda made the Chinese people believe that all Uyghurs are terrorists. And they are terrorists because of their religion, because Islam, advocate terrorism. And so there is a mistrust between the Uyghur people, a very peaceful, kind, generous people that was known for centuries, and then suddenly branded as terrorists. And that, in a way, kind of helped the government to secure its persecution without any voice from the Chinese community, because they tend to believe that what the government is saying is correct. That's why these people deserved to be locked up in millions in concentration camps and rotten to death. That is very, very terrifying. It's extremely a horrifying situation when a state use its own power and the propaganda machine, because they have all the power, whereas Uyghurs don't have anything apart from telling the truth. And even telling the truth, we can only do it in other countries, in exile, not within. So under that situation, when you look at, it's just such helpless and hopeless situation at the moment. So this kind of mistrust between the community itself is very painful. It's very painful. Once my friend, who was a taxi driver, who had a Chinese woman and with his son, who were visiting here in the UK, and from Heilongjiang. So this taxi driver is Uyghur origin, and he asked her about what she thinks about what is happening to Uyghurs in Xinjiang or in East Turkestan. And she said they are all terrorists. Recently, we had 2,000 Uyghurs transported from that region to Heilongjiang, one of the most well-known, notorious prisons, Tailai prison. And it said the prison officers requested pay rise because they will be dealing with terrorists. 2,000 terrorists were transported to these prisons. And these so-called terrorists, they are just people like me, myself, who might have just spoke out of inequality and the terrible treatments. So this is the kind of widespread terror that we are facing and my community are facing.
Yes, absolutely, very, very, very powerfully spoken there, Rahima. And I know in Pakistan too, although I think we're going to have to stop now, I'm afraid. But I mean, I know there's a huge issue too about the image of Christians, and it's about information, and it's about trying to humanize these minorities that are just sort of demonized, scapegoated, and all of that. But I'm going to have to stop there, I'm afraid, because I think we've really run out of time. But thank you so much for joining us and bringing such powerful testimony to this webinar, and thank you too to Fiona Bruce, who I know has had to leave us. And those watching now might be asking, well, what can I do to help? Well, ACN and Open Doors have worked together to come up with some simple actions for parliamentarians and members of the public. So for parliamentarians, they're asking three things. Read the research highlighted today by Open Doors and Aid to the Church in Need, and the links are in the chat. And please attend the debate in Westminster Hall on Thursday, the 17th of March. The debate is on the persecution of women and girls from religious minorities. And for a briefing document or for draft written questions that you can submit alongside the debate, do please email either Finn Shiner, ACN's Parliamentary and Press Officer, or Open Doors Parliamentary Office, John Colby. And their emails are all in the chat. And you can add your name to the early day motion about this subject. And again, information is in the chat. Now, for supporters and benefactors, ACN and Open Doors is asking you to write to your MP, asking them to do the three things mentioned. Read the research, attend the debate and submit questions, and add their name to the early day motion. So Open Doors and Aid to the Church in Need are prioritising action for girls and women suffering as members of minority faith communities. And they've been advocating as well on individual cases, and I'm assured there's an awful lot of mediation going on behind the scenes, as these are often such delicate and life-threatening situations. And I know they welcome anyone who wants to know more, just to get in touch. Well, that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid, today, but it's been a pleasure to have you all here. And I think we can agree that all violence against women must stop, and that includes those from religious minority communities. So with your help, let's hope they will no longer be the forgotten women. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.